The report that we've made available to you and now can be accessed online by clicking on our website, falconers.ca, but is also available in hard copy and on stick here in the room, is a 126-page report that's in a format unique to the police complaints process. Because it's a somewhat awkward format and you're getting it literally midstream, we have taken the unusual step of preparing a 10-page PowerPoint that we propose to present to you over the next 6 to 7 minutes. I apologize for the lawyer talking at you for 6 or 7 minutes, but the leadership and the family have asked us to do this just to communicate the findings. Please understand that this PowerPoint is not an interpretive exercise. It quotes directly from the report. So I'm going to get started very quickly because I want to take you folks through it very fast and not take too much of your time. But we believe that the findings are so extraordinary and so damning that it's important you see them for yourselves. We also wish to emphasize that there can be no statement such as, well, there's been a substantiation of the charges, but wait for the hearing. The facts found in the report are not an issue, that the scene wasn't protected, that witnesses were not interviewed, that exhibits were not seized. These are not an issue. What is an issue, and we'll go to hearing one day, is whether the two investigators and the supervisor are guilty of neglect of duty and or discreditable conduct. That's going to go to hearing, but the facts underlying it, they're known today. The facts about J.P. Lesveque and his role in this, they're known today, they're not an issue. So we'll start with the first page. The first thing that you'll see, and there's page numbers after each point so that you can check the report for yourself. The Criminal Investigation Bureau investigators prematurely determined that the death was non-criminal. And I'm going to skip to the next paragraph. Second sentence, the OPP concluded that there did not appear, so the OPP looked at this, we didn't even know they were looking at it after the fact, but they do. The OPP concluded that there did not appear to be any basis for this conclusion at that stage, especially in light of the cause of death not having been identified yet, and a witness at the scene indicating that he had seen two people in an altercation the night before. The next, no formal statements were taken from any of the individuals who were with the deceased shortly before his death. These individuals should have been formally interviewed at the earliest opportunity. Detective Constable Whipple said there was no thought of bringing in the people who had been with the deceased for formal interviews. Please understand, it is Policing 101 that you interview the people who were with the deceased in and around the time of the death. Not only were the interviews never done, formal interviews, the detective admits they didn't even occur to them to bring them in. Next, please. The press releases. You will see, and it's now become standard fare in the city of Thunder Bay, that they issue press releases before the autopsy. What is striking about this case, and what speaks to the role of the chief of police, is while this sad series of events is unfolding in real time, an inquest is going on up the street talking about the tendency of the Thunder Bay Police to issue press releases around Indigenous drownings and prematurely determine that no foul play was involved. Could this be possible? Next slide, please. There was no review of the files. The Criminal Investigation Branch investigators, most importantly Detective Harrison, did not review on an ongoing basis supplementary occurrence reports in the investigative file. And as a result, he was unaware, for example, of the interview with KK conducted at the scene by a uniformed officer in which a witness described a physical altercation between Indigenous men at the scene the night before the deceased's body was found. Basic Police 101. Next slide, please. The CID investigators provided inadequate or no direction to the Forensic Identification Unit in a manner consistent with treatment of a sudden death. No video was taken of the scene. No
photographs of the body itself or the riverbanks in close proximity to the river were taken. No consideration was given to holding the scene until the autopsy was conducted. No measurements were taken at the scene. You would have had a stronger investigative actions by police if there was a car accident. They didn't even measure the location of a death. The devaluation of Indigenous life is so patent from this report, it springs from the page. Next slide, please. The Thunder Bay Police Service's efforts to contact FF, who by some accounts was the last person known to be alive with the deceased, were sporadic and given the lowest priority. The interview doesn't happen until months later. Detective Harrison stated that they never heard from FF, and that concluded their investigation. No further attempts were made to contact them. There's a page number after each quote. The police waited for the witness to come to them, and when he didn't, concluded their investigation. Next, please. And this speaks to the issue of Chief Lesveque and why waiting for a hearing isn't going to change anything. The matter was not dealt with as an investigation subject to major case management. It should have been. Even if it was not formally so designated, there was no investigative plan, no organized evaluation of ongoing steps to complete the investigation, all stemming from a mischaracterization of the nature of the investigation. There appeared to be little or no formal process for how a lead investigator was assigned, and very little supervision or oversight of the investigation thereafter. That reflected, among other things, a misconception of the nature of the sudden death investigation and organizational deficiencies. This is not going to change because the two investigators are on trial for neglect of duty or discreditable conduct. These deficiencies are going on today. If a nationally spotlighted inquest around your police incompetence around Indigenous drownings isn't enough to get Chief Lesveque to address these organizational deficiencies, how will waiting for a police hearing on discreditable conduct do the trick? Every day that this service is left in this condition is another day where lives of Indigenous people are devalued. Next slide, please. No broader canvas of the local businesses and area residences was conducted. Detective Constable McKeever indicated that he walked up and down looking for external cameras on buildings close to the scene. He did not see any, and that was the extent of his efforts. Were this not about a death? Were this not about Brad's brother? Were this not about a member of Rainy River First Nations? This would almost be comical. Next slide, please. Detective Harrison chose not to meet with Civilian Witness 7, and I'm telling you, as we speak today, Civilian Witness 7 is the private investigator, David Perry, hired by the family. Detective Harrison chose not to meet with Civilian Witness 7. Detective Harrison said that he was not going to speak to any private investigator about the case. As Civilian Witness 7 observed, if a family believed that something untoward happened to their loved one, it is up to the police to take that seriously and investigate the matter. What I want to emphasize is that someone who does their job on a death investigation wants to hear from the family members about their concerns because that's relevant information. In this case, Brad DeBungee attended the Thunder Bay detachment with the private investigator beside him and pleaded with Detective Harrison to meet with Mr. Perry. What they were met with was contempt and arrogance. Next slide, please. Because of the premature determination that this was a non-suspicious death, no forensic examination was conducted on the exhibits. Page 118. Do you need to wait for a Police Act hearing to know why
Any service that would permit this to happen under their roof is a service that's deeply flawed. Next slide, please. This is how the report addresses issues around racism. Pages 123 and 124, and I'm quoting. The evidence overwhelmingly supports the inference that Detective Harrison and Detective Constable Whipple prematurely concluded that Stacy DeBungee rolled into the river and drowned without any external intervention. It can also be reasonably inferred that this premature conclusion may have been drawn because the deceased was Indigenous. It can reasonably be inferred that the investigating officers failed to treat or protect the deceased and his family equally and without discrimination based on the deceased's Indigenous status. The final slide actually refers at page 118 of the report to the 7 Youth Inquest. It was also troubling that this inadequate investigation took place in the context of an ongoing coroner's inquest into the deaths of 7 First Nations youths, most involving river-related deaths. As Deputy Chief Hay acknowledged, one would have reasonably expected that investigators would be particularly vigilant in ensuring that the investigation of the sudden death of an Indigenous man found in the river was thorough and responsive to the community's concerns. Unfortunately, the opposite was true. I'm going to conclude with the following important observation. While the police have publicly said they cannot comment by virtue of Section 95 of the Police Services Act, as a lawyer, I simply utterly reject that claim. The section they're referring to refers to preserving secrecy. Since the complainants, the leadership, have chosen to release this report, it is not secret. There is no secrecy to protect. The report is a public document. The Act speaks to, quote, protecting secrecy. The complainants need the public discussion today. They need accountability today so that another Stacy DeBungee doesn't happen tomorrow. There is no confidence. Reasonably, there is no confidence. No one in this room could put up their hand and say they have confidence in this chief of police or this service. This chief of police is quoted in the report. It's not on the slide, but it's quoted in the report. He called Detective Whipple, and he said and asked, a witness wasn't interviewed? Question. He was told no, he wasn't. He said, that's a problem. That's the quote, that's a problem. And he gave no order, and he gave no direction, and he did not change the investigators at that time. This is not a complicated exercise. I want to emphasize in closing that when you see this level of shamelessness, and that's what you're seeing, in the face of these level of deficiencies, people need to act. Thank you very much for taking the time to listen to us.